Hey Alex, welcome to A Day in a Life.
Thanks for having me, Darren. Really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, awesome. So just a quick disclosure, you are my current boss right now. I'm interning at Hylant, and you are the cyber risk advisor. Can you tell us a little bit more about that role and that department?
Yeah, so I'm a cyber risk advisor here at Hylant Group. So that encompasses many different things, but kind of my strategy and what I do on a daily basis is I really make sure that we're working with our underwriters and our carrier partners in the right way on the cyber side of things. So that entails making sure that we're placing our clients with the right carrier, not only from a coverage standpoint, but from a risk management vendor standpoint and also a claims team standpoint. As we see claims go up more and more from a frequency and a severity standpoint, we want to make sure the claims team are really on par with the coverage that we're also purchasing. Outside of that, I work with our clients on making sure that their controls are up to standard to place cyber insurance. And then I also do a little moonlighting on our claims team as well. As claims start to come in, I help them review the forms and make sure that we're asking for the right coverage in the right places.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a great overview there. And just kind of back to what you just said with cyber being both a frequency and severity game. I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit of for some other lines of business, the underwriters are able to kind of play either with the frequency or with the severity, but in cyber, you're up against both elements here. Can you kind of give that overview?
Yeah, absolutely. Cyber is still a very young line of business compared to property and general liability and some of the others that we work with on a daily basis. But we've really seen cyber go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. It used to be a frequency play where we were seeing a lot of little claims happen and we can battle that. But really, since COVID started over the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen bad actors really take it to another level. So not only are we seeing those small claims happen on a very frequently timetable, but we're also seeing the severity of those claims skyrocket and go very high. So it's really caused a challenge to make sure that underwriters are writing not only what they want to write, but making sure they're handling their capacity in the right way. So from a broker standpoint, we got to make sure that we're keeping all our partners in good graces and making sure that we're giving them business they can write and that they want to write.
Yeah, definitely a interesting time to be working in the cyber industry. A lot of other lines, especially with the hard market right now. But just kind of in cyber specifically, like how have you kind of seen this product mature? Over the years, you've been working in cyber, as a specialist for almost like 3 years now, kind of on the carrier side as at an MGA and now at Hylant, on a brokerage side. How has that kind of changed, at that perspective of cyber being newer, you at the carrier side, and then coming to the retailer side and having it mature a little more?
Yeah, I think it's super funny, right? We use the word hard market right now to describe cyber, and I like to take it a little bit a step further. I call it an upside down market. And what I mean by that is I feel like it's flipping every single day, right? Traditionally we would get underwriting updates on a quarterly basis. It really feels like it's moving so quickly right now that we're getting underwriting updates on a quarterly basis, whether that's appetite changes, new or exiting markets from the class, and also we're getting new controls on a weekly basis on what needs to be implemented and what's changing for specific carriers. For me specifically, I definitely moonlighted in cyber early in my career, placed that business. But then as I moved into cyber full time, I've got to see the growth and the transition of cyber overall. So when I started underwriting cyber business, it was very much business name revenue. I'll give you $5 million worth of limits and we'll move forward. There wasn't much questioning on industry class, right? I use municipalities as a good example. They were tougher to write, but they weren't off limits by any means. And then as I slowly moved into the broker role, we started to see the market change. So the main changes that I've seen is carriers are getting more specific on what industry classes they want to write, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing, or maybe just a more basis of contractors. So industry appetite has shrunk a little bit, but we're also seeing coverage change, right? So in the past, it was who can put the most in their wording and enhance their policy form and make it as broad as possible. And now we're starting to see the strings get pulled back, specifically around ransomware, adding co-insurance, adding sublimits, kind of pulling some business interruption or contingent business interruption back. So it's putting some pressure on brokers to make sure we're asking for the right coverage for the right industry class, making sure our clients are protected in the way they should be.
Yeah. So what are you kind of seeing? It makes a lot of sense with kind of the industry appetite, from the carrier's perspective, just trying to be as specialized and specific as possible with their expertise when they're kind of building out, their underwriting team, and kind of like crafting like their appetite to the brokers. How do you see them kind of doing that, especially with these more like niche areas like, healthcare versus like public entity? Like, when is it like, oh, we just do healthcare and then we do all lines, like cyber included? Or when is it we're like, oh, our cyber team just does multiple different like niches across the board?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, right? I think what makes it so difficult is that cyber is really a beast of its own, right? So if you have a carrier that loves to write healthcare on all other lines, doesn't make sense for them to pull cyber into that group and try to write the cyber for those same entities. I think we're still a little too early to make that decision, but I do think it's moving in a direction where each industry is going to have a little bit of a different form. It's not going to be a broad brush, same form for every industry. We're going to have niches, just like you mentioned, and we're going to ask for certain coverages for those certain industries. So I think we're moving in that direction. I think the scopes of coverage and the scopes of, risk transfer and triggers for each industry are going to become more detailed and more exact. So I would look for the cyber marketplace to go that way in the upcoming years.
Mm-hmm. And then just kind of, being on the brokerage side, being like the distribution for the carriers, I think brokers in general just have some ability to kind of pick and choose which carriers they work with, and then also like how the broker wants to work, with that carrier. So what point is it, the broker kind of picking or kind of, encouraging like the carrier on how the carrier like shapes that department, or how they kind of interact with the brokers?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Darren. I think, right now the underwriters in the marketplace definitely hold a lot of the power. So it's really how far they want to extend themselves at this point. And it's my job as a broker to go out there and, really uncover any stone and find the coverage and the capacity that's needed for my clients.
Mm-hmm. And then just for like your perspective, in the past, the carrier side, you worked at a wholesaler as well, and then now the retailer side. How do you think that perspective helps you navigate, these kind of uncertain circumstances? Because you've kind of seen just kind of a broad overview of how the people you're interacting with, in that chain, how they kind of function on their day-to-day as well. How does that kind of benefit you, having that perspective?
Yeah, I think, if you look back at my career, it's been a little unique. I've played on a number of different sides, right? So I definitely do have the perspective. And I think it benefits me because I've been in their shoes, right? I know that there's holdups and you have to get authority to write specific things. So I think that's built up some patience with me. I don't expect everything to happen right now. So I think I give my underwriters a little bit longer leash to make sure that they have the ability to get creative and get the authority that they need to ultimately put terms out.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of reflecting on your career now. So what kind of made you want to specialize in cyber? How do you see that kind of as a, emerging industry, and just kind of, something, I've heard the kind of the argument been made of like, oh, like D&O's been around for, let's say like 100 years, but then, everyone, like there's so many people that already have all that knowledge, but then cyber's, new line, 5, 10 years, that like that curve, that knowledge curve, like isn't as high. So then if you kind of get in cyber earlier, then you're kind of on the same like playing field in a way as people who have been in the industry necessarily for like 20 plus years, but then they haven't been doing like just cyber. Like it seems that it's kind of like evened out in some way, like expertise wise. Cause like you said earlier, like it seems that every day is kind of a new day with kind of like all the changing controls, all the changing appetites, and ransomware like in the news every other day.
Yeah, it's every day's different. Every day's exciting. I know people say that all the time, but I feel like with cyber, it really is true. There's always a challenge, but for my first two jobs in my career, I was very much a generalist. I did a little bit of everything: property, general liability, workers' comp. And as I sat there, I realized I was kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, right? I was doing a lot. And when I looked back at it, I saw this up and coming line of coverage. It was trendy. It was changing every day. There was new markets. We had some carriers like CFC and Coalition that were doing things that were very unique. Their media was different. Their websites were different. And I thought it was a really good opportunity to be an expert in a line. But it was also a line of business that I wouldn't get bored with, right? It was going to be constantly changing. I would get to sit down and do interviews like this. And you also get to, what I think is fun is that on the weekends, I'm watching YouTube channels on cryptocurrency and the ever-changing landscape of cyber and how it affects us, not just from an insurance standpoint, but from a life standpoint. And, we can really bring it full circle with the technology aspect. And I think that's a lot of fun. From the education standpoint, I would agree with you. There's a ton of knowledge, even here at Hylant, right? The risk advisors have been doing D&O and EPLI and all that good stuff forever. The cyber education still learning, and I get to be on the the edge of that and learn with everyone else.
So back to what you said earlier of that generalist background, jack of all trades, master of none, just, reflecting on advice back to like your 21-year-old self, or even, like a recent college grad. And it just personally for me, with my recent job search and trying to figure out where I want to start, I think it's kind of difficult to balance how specialized you want to get, but then also how broad of a foundation you want as well. Because sometimes you can get too niche too quickly, and then you realize 3 years in your career, like, oh, I don't, you could be professional liability, then go like healthcare and be very like small healthcare, go like transportation specialist. And like what, 3 years in your career, and you're like, I don't like, this line of business anymore. How do I kind of get broader again? How can you kind of talk about that personally, like to yourself, or and advice to kind of others, kind of trying to make that similar decision?
Yeah, I like to think I'm still fairly young, right? So I'm still navigating my career, but my background's a little unique, right? Like I was an English major at Purdue. I was expecting to be a writer in some type of media content. And then I kind of fell into insurance. So I definitely took the first 5 years of my career and was a broad brush stroke, right? To really become a generalist and learn everything I could. And then I went to specialize. I think the biggest thing for me was I put myself around people that I could really learn from, right? So even looking back on my career, there's people like Drew Dean at Burns and Wilcox and Rick Davis at Henriot Group, people that really mentored me and got me on my road. And even now I try to partner with people like Julian Silvestro and Joe Willigman here at Hylant that I can learn from. So if I was giving advice to young people moving into the industry, it would be partner and find mentors to help you push you in the road that you want to go. From a specialty standpoint, I have learned more and I've learned quicker as a specialist because I'm able to target on one line. But I really encourage that generalist overview starting out. I think that benefited me greatly.
Yeah, no, it's definitely great advice of kind of finding the mentors and just people that had not only the wisdom to share, but also like the time and kind of willingness to kind of give back and just kind of give that advice. So I think that's definitely great. And then just with that generalist background, thankfully now, if the risk management majors and the internships, I just kind of am lucky enough to have that background of kind of internships, little short cycles to kind of experiment a little bit before you kind of start that overall career path. So what would you say your career would have looked a little different if you did come into the industry with that risk management insurance major?
I wish I would have had the risk management major. Honestly, I didn't really know insurance was a field that it was as broad as it was, right? I just kind of thought we had the State Farms of the world, and that's where you got insurance, and that was the end of it. So I think my career would have definitely excelled a lot quicker than it has if I would have had the risk management background, right? I was still learning insurance 3-4 years into my career. So if you have the ability to do a risk management major throughout college or even minor in it, I think it definitely gives you a leg up and gives you the ability to you went dark on me.
Motion
to
sensor.
to really, kind of excel your career. I think the internships are so important, right? Darren, we get to do a lot of fun stuff here at Hylant, and I know your past internships have been great, and it really just opens up your eyes to what you want to do and gives you a head start.
Yeah, and then kind of on that note of specializing and just because you only have so much time, like not to be so like philosophical, but like in life, you can't be an expert in everything. And then once you kind of set your intention and your focus, a little narrower, then you can get, an inch wide, but a mile deep, in that, and then really specialize and really be like an expert and then just continuously excel and stay on top of that. So what would you say to these college grads or maybe somebody in their career who's trying to kind of make that pivot to cyber? What would be your advice to them of being, starting that specialty, like getting very specialized very quickly in that? And then how would you say that, a transition from cyber to a different line, a different P&C product, like, do you think that would be pretty difficult, or how do you think like that transferable skills of working in cyber, a new market, a hard market, how do you think that would help a possible transition if somebody decided that they would want to do that?
Yeah, if you're interested in cyber, please come over. We're good people. We need more people, right? There's definitely a lack of talent on the cyber side. We need good people, and we want people that need to learn. I think what is unique about cyber is that the forms are changing so quickly, right? We're getting a new form on a weekly basis. So what cyber really challenges all of us to do is stay up to date. One of the things that I do at Hylant every single day is I'm reading forms, I'm reading endorsements, I'm looking for triggers of the policy and how that affects our clients. So I think if you create a base in cyber, right, you're going to be able to pick up on the different forms and how they react and how they the little nuances of the wordings, right? So then if you move forward to D&O or shift to a different specialty, you're going to have such a solid foundation of form reading and how to apply that. So I would think other lines you could pick up fairly easy after you've read hundreds and hundreds of forms and the changing forms on the cyber side of things. I think it allows for an easy transition.
Yeah, so something we've just talked about a little bit over the last few months with the internships, just kind of that industry crossover of being like a cybersecurity specialist and then coming into the insurance industry, just kind of that overlap of, or really just the necessary knowledge of knowing all like the terminology like multi-factor authentication and some other like controls, and just kind of how helpful do you think that is, or how do we as an industry kind of attract people from cybersecurity or, government positions, or just kind of related sides, like kind of after the claim occurred, or to prevent, a possible claim? How do we as an industry kind of attract people to the insurance side?
Yeah, I think, COVID has done this a little bit. I think it's helped make the insurance industry push forward, right? I'm working from home. I have been working from home. We've kind of stepped up to compete with the tech industry a little bit, right? From an attractive standpoint. So I think that's helped. But for cyber specifically, it's not getting any easier, right? You've looked at the applications, you've looked at the questions that we've gone through. They're only getting more and more technical. So I think the lines between cyber insurance and computer engineers and cyber security specialists, that line is getting closer and closer. So it's only going to be a matter of time before the two industries collide and really start working together even more than they already are. So I think the transition from non-insurance to insurance will be a lot easier for those people as well.
Mm-hmm. And then just reflecting on, my time at Hylant so far, I just find it very interesting of like who we talk to, from the insureds, from the companies. It's chief information officers, chief technology officers, and then just kind of the understanding that they have, about their business, and then also just kind of trying to bridge that gap of what happens when there is a ransomware attack, like, and then just kind of having them kind of, I think it's just kind of like a little bit of a back and forth. You're kind of like feeling each other out, like on that side, like, oh, like we don't need insurance because our controls are so strong. Or sometimes it's like, how much insurance do we want to buy, and at what point do we buy more insurance or improve our controls? It just seems to be kind of like a balancing act sometimes.
Yeah, and I have a very long-winded answer to that, but I'll try to keep it short. But the first part of your question, I think one of the most fun things for me is that cyber is blending over with so many other lines, right? We have a great executive risk practice here at Hylant, and it's fun to get to talk to them how when they're placing D&O business, the directors and offices are talking about how can a cyber event affect our D&O coverage, right? What do we need to be concerned on that line of business? So the bleeding between our two conversations and our meetings have become so enhanced with cyber being injected to the conversation, which is a lot of fun. But through that transition, it's also fun to see when we do our renewal meetings and our pre-renewal meetings, we're seeing more of the chief technology officers or the CISOs get invited to the round tables with the board of directors, and they're getting a spot at that table, which is a lot of fun because it allows me to talk techie, it allows me to talk risk management and really bridge the gap between the two. Now, when we talk about do you buy more insurance or do you enhance your controls, the cyber broker in me says both, right? Cyber claims aren't getting any cheaper, they're not happening any less. So we need to make sure that we're transferring that risk as much as possible. But we can't just transfer risk anymore. We got to make sure that we're keeping up to date with our controls. I talk about quarterly updates and monthly updates, but realistically, you need to be working with your brokers. And if you're a broker, we need to be talking to our clients more frequently about the updating controls and what's your renewal is going to look like, what you need to have in place to make sure that we can still obtain the risk transfer tool of an insurance policy. The number one question I get and have gotten over the past couple of years are we buying enough information, or are we buying enough insurance, right? What limit should we be carrying? And that's just another example of the computer engineers bleeding into the insurance world. We're utilizing more applications and algorithms to pull claims data, to provide real life data to our clients. And that's been a huge help over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting of what you said of like, it just takes time to implement the controls. The carrier just being like that multiple touch points throughout the year leading up to the renewal, and then having, enough time, because the carrier might, quote it, putting like to subjectivities, like subject to bind, MFA, and they might only have MFA at, half their locations. And then how long does it take to, install this or a different control at all their locations? And at what point is, the carrier still going to quote it if they're like in the process of doing it? I just think like when everything's moving so fast, I think time just becomes more and more valuable. But then like sometimes you don't have the time to do it.
Right. Time's the key, right? I think in insurance, we look at things in such quarterly windows, right? Like 120 days out, we send out our applications. 90 days, we're going to have a pre-renewal meeting, and then we work on brokering the deals. Cyber is really a 365-day project, right? It's a full life cycle of what we need to do. But I think as cyber matures, it really starts comparing to a property policy, right? And the property loss control we go through. Do we have an alarm system? Do we have an endpoint detection? Multi-factor authentication is kind of like a barrier of entry that bad actors have to find a way to get around. That's kind of like a fence around our property, right? So there's so many parallels that we can make from cyber to property. But like I said, cyber is really a 365-day a year project. Bad actors are trying to penetrate businesses on the daily and multiple times a day. It only takes one to get through. So we really got to stay on top of it throughout the year.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something we've briefly talked about, over the last few months, just kind of the parallel of property to cyber, and just kind of with, those, you can see like controls on like the cyber side is kind of like property, like the fire alarms, the exits. You hear like people who work in property insurance like walk around, a building, and they're like immediately looking for like the smoke detector, the sprinklers, and just kind of like they're just kind of like trained to look for it. And then, property is like the protection classes. And I think we've kind of briefly talked about how, when cyber matures, is there going to be like these rough guidelines, or each carrier seems to be doing like their different thing and asking for different terms, using, different like definitions. And it's kind of hard on the brokerage side to kind of match, apples with oranges, and then you're sending out multiple applications to the insured. You need this app for this carrier, this app for this carrier. Like at what point, is that kind of where the cyber market's going in its maturity to kind of have some standards? Does those standards come from the government, at some point, of what's insurable? Where's ransomware playing in? Are we paying ransomware? Are we not? I think I threw a lot at you, but let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the property thing, right? One thing we didn't mention is like we run fire drills, right? We run tornado drills. One of the things our clients can do that's very, very cheap is create an incident response plan, right? Who to call, how to call, when to call, establishing roles, right? Who's keeping track of scopes of work? Who's keeping track of invoices? I think one thing that gets lost in the shuffle is who has the ability to make the decision if we're going to pay the ransom demand. If we get the clearance from our forensics, like, hey, we're good to go. Do you guys want to pay this? Who has the ability to say yes? Do we need a vote? Do we need to roundtable it? Those are things we need to think of prior to having a cyber event. Time's money. So we need to be prepared for that. So just like we do with fire drills, we should be running tabletops and creating incident response plans. When we get to government involvement with cyber and the kind of leveling out and streamlining the process, I think that's what we're all, kind of on eggshells on, right? What's going to come down? We've seen other countries establish rules that you can't pay ransoms. I'm not necessarily going to get into that because I'm not sure where I fall on it, but I think paying the ransom has saved a lot of businesses. And I think the insurance and the risk transfer has saved a ton of small businesses and large businesses by being able to negotiate and pay that. So it's definitely a tricky subject. I think we're going to see more laws surrounding that. I think the OFAC list that we've talked about, if a ransom gang is associated with terrorism, they're illegal to pay. I think that's a really good start. But once again, that just makes the cyber insurance policy that much more important to make sure that we have the forensics team that have the details on those bad actors to know, can we pay them? Can we not pay them? And make sure that the bad actors have those good reviews, right? That you will get your systems back. So that just puts more pressure on the cyber policy to make sure it's in place.
So can you kind of walk through, what that incident response plan looks like instead of, scrambling when, this claim happens and kind of scrambling, what do we do? What do we do? Kind of rehearsing that worst case scenario ahead of time, and just with the carriers themselves. Like some advertise like their claims team, some advertise kind of their breach response team. Because at the end of the day, you're buying, more than just the insurance. You're also buying that expertise on the carrier side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that expertise is worth its weight in gold, right? They are so important in the process. And I think it's important to say that every incident response plan is going to be different, right? We've talked about a lot of industry segmentation. A manufacturing incident response plan is going to look completely different than a healthcare incident response plan because they're just so tremendously different. But, one thing I can say is when you buy an insurance policy, the worst thing you can do is put it on the shelf and let it get dusty, or put it in a file and forget about it, right? So starting out, you really want to make sure you know who to call first. Are you going to call your broker first? Are you going to call a carrier hotline first? Or are you going to try to call a breach coast first? We got to remember that the panel providers that are on every cyber policy are there for a reason, right? They're pre-negotiated rates, they're experts in their field. So we really want to utilize them, because if we go off that sheet and don't have pre-approval, that does give carriers grounds to reduce coverage or potentially void out that invoice. So I would encourage everyone, and I would encourage brokers out there to make sure we relay who those panel providers are, to make sure our clients know their first hour, 2 hour after an event, who to call, when to call, how to call, and make sure we're utilizing the right people. From there, those incident response plans really fall into place, right? Like I said, everyone is part of the IT team. And we want to make sure that we establish specific roles so everyone has a job and it just moves like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah. I think with what you're saying of, buying the insurance policy, and then I think like the mindset of some businesses, some business owners themselves are just kind of buying it because they need to buy it and not really like looking too into it, or just like, I just think people in general don't really want to think about, the worst case scenario. And we're buying insurance, and then we're just kind of like putting it on the back burner. But like you said, don't let your insurance policy get dusty. Like actually like look at it, because when that bad event happens, at some point it's if it happens, or when it happens, not if it happens.
Yeah, the cool thing about a cyber policy, and what gets me super excited about cyber insurance, is it's a very holistic approach, right? So you have the policy itself, that's the risk transfer, right? There's a bunch of definitions, a bunch of words. But then we get access to those claims teams, right? And you have the ability as an insured to vet those. Who do you want as your breach coach? Who do you want to vet from a forensic standpoint? But then also, every cyber carrier out there is going to have some sort of risk management tools that you can use as pre-breach vendors, right? So is there scans that you can utilize? Is there intentional phishing campaigns that you can utilize? It's such a one-stop shop for so many clients. And it's a very holistic approach that if you take advantage of it, you can get a lot of money's worth your premium.
So on that note of kind of like the innovation, or just kind of like new trends kind of in the industry, just for that risk management standpoint, what have you seen, or what do you think one of these most valuable tools to you are? Like the platforms that we use, Seattle Labs is kind of putting out multiple quotes at once and just making that efficient, or benchmarking wise, or what are some like the tools that are very like helpful to you and just kind of help bridge that gap, of understand between what you're doing, your knowledge of doing, this is a day in the life, you're doing this every day, versus somebody who's might be buying cyber for their first time, or even internally, like the client executives that we help and kind of give some consulting to on that side, familiarity of other PNC products, and then with cyber, just trying to educate or breach that gap of what's going on in the market, and just kind of like that expertise there.
Yeah, I think there's four items that make my life tremendously easier on a day-to-day basis. You mentioned Seattle Labs that we utilize through Amwins pretty regularly, but quoting platforms for smaller business, right? Those are a lifesaver. Quote issue bind platforms are really nice. They typically provide a form comparison with them. So I love those. I think the platforms that are out there right now are partnering with really good carriers. And it makes life a lot easier for non-specialists as well. So that's a great tool that we utilize. Another tool that I've mentioned a couple times today is CyberCube. We are huge fans of CyberCube here at Hylant. Like I said, it answers the question of how much limits should we carry. And I think that's a really good tool that blends the gap between engineering and insurance, but it also shows the quickly maturing of cyber policy or cyber coverage as a whole, right? We're able to pull real claims data and provide our clients real benchmarking. So that's great for new purchasers, but it's also great for people that are saying, hey, do we need to increase our transfer and buy higher limits? It just provides a very holistic approach to the purchasing. The third one I would say is the scans that are being ran. I feel like a lot of the carriers right now are running those external scans, and we're able to go back to our clients and say, hey, what do you think about this? So you have some open ports here. There might be a patching cadence that doesn't look like it's been put together. Can you go back and look with your IT team to go through that? So I think the scans that carriers are utilizing and developing is such a huge asset to what we do on a daily basis, and really provides concrete evidence to why the controls need to be dialed in moving forward.
Did you have a fourth one?
Did I say I had a fourth one? So we talked about platforms, we talked about CyberCube, we talked about the
scans,
and then you know what? I blanked on my fourth one. I apologize, Darren.
I'll edit it. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
So back to what you're saying about benchmarking. I just think seeing it's tangible. You can see the charts. You can see the curve, like the percentiles of, oh, this is the worst case scenario up here. This is kind of the standard 80 percentile of limits, or where that ransomware sits, or other kind of measures of how the claim will come in. And I think back to what we said earlier of bridging that gap of understanding of how we as insurance professionals are working kind of in this industry. How do we explain or describe or encourage the insureds to buy more limits, or why are we buying more limits? Why are we paying more? Oh, you're just on commission. I just think having something tangible to as you said, bring to the table when the directors and officers sitting down deciding where's the budget, where do we have room in the budget to have this other expense, or add tens of thousands of dollars to our insurance to buy more in limits. I just how valuable do you see that being?
It's so valuable, right? Because it's tangible, right? We're starting to put a monetary value to something that you can't necessarily touch, right? We talk about the cloud. What's the cloud, right? It's another person's computer, right? But the term cloud makes it feel like we can't touch it, right? We can definitely go to a building and say this building's worth $2 million. We need to insure it for $2 million. Cyber has been so non-tangible, so utilizing those benchmarking and those simulations really put something that we can touch and really put a monetary value to the correct limits. And I think it allows people to budget a little bit better and provide, when we go to board of directors or where we go to, decision makers, it allows them to sit down and look from a really mathematical standpoint of what we need to purchase.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, last couple of questions. What is the favorite thing about your job? And also, where do you see the cyber market going once it does get more mature, or when do you see us coming out of a hardening market? I don't even know if you would call it a hardening market anymore. It just kind of seems like it's just the market itself is it's just how it is.
Yeah, my favorite part of the job, and it's going to sound cliche, is definitely the people, right? The insurance community is very unique, but subset of that, the cyber insurance community is very tight knit, right? I get to work with a lot of good people, people that I would put on my Mount Rushmore of insurance people, and that's really exciting for me, right? We got people at forensics firms that we talk with every day. We get to talk to data breach attorneys every day. We get to talk to wholesale brokers every day, and everyone really feeds off each other, and everyone can provide something to the conversation, and that's a lot of fun for me. Also, like I said, I get to talk about things like Bitcoin and blockchain, and people look at you a little funny, but you're getting to learn a lot of new stuff really quickly, which is exciting and makes every day a little bit different. When I look at cyber, and we use the term hard market, right? I've continued to say upside down market. I think hard market says that there's a soft market behind it at some point. I don't think a soft market's ever going to come back to cyber, right? I think we're going to get a leveled out market. The way I put it is cyber's looking at itself in the mirror and saying, all right, to make sure that I'm around in 15, 20 years and I can continue to provide coverage, we need to make some changes. And we've seen those changes come very fast. So I think we still have another 18 to 24 months of pricing increases and changes of underwriting style and appetite changes. But I think once we get through that and get over that hump, you're going to start seeing a leveling out of policy changes, of pricing increases, and we're going to have a lot more, not huge steps moving forward. It's going to be a lot of little steps as we see the landscape change.
Yeah, well, it's definitely gonna be interesting to see, when it happens. That makes a lot of sense. There's kind of that leveling out versus, hard to soft market, kind of that cyclical nature that we see in a lot of other lines of business.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think a soft market is anywhere in our future.
Well, I guess I'll keep you in a job.
Something like that, right? But like I said, I think the cyber market's going to continue to change, right? Like right now, multi-factor authentication is king, right? We talk about MFA and we talk about ransomware. The past has shown that bad actors will possibly find a way around MFA, and we'll start talking about a new control in a couple months, right? So it's kind of always trying to stay ahead. We're never going to be able to stay ahead of the bad actors, but trying to stay in line with them as much as possible is going to be our biggest challenge, right? So always trying to look ahead. What's the next control? What's the next trend of attacks that we're going to see, right? We talk about ransomware all the time, but there's a ton of other attacks that are going on a daily basis. So we have to keep those in mind as an industry.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thanks so much for coming on and sharing some insight on a day in the life of a cyber specialist.
Yep, day in the life. Everyone, every day is different. The cyber market is working hard, whether you're an underwriter, a broker, or claims adjuster, and we're trying our best to level this out for our clients. And I'm looking forward to what the future has in store for cyber. And I appreciate you having me as your first official guest, Darren.
Of course, thank you. I couldn't think of a better person besides my boss.
I appreciate it. We'll make the next couple weeks easy on you.
Okay, thank you.